You don't typically work for an organization, you work for a person. And if that person connects with you on a human being basis, you have a sense of belonging, you're gonna stay in that organization.
This week on Cleared for Takeoff, I have David Orbuch joining me. David is a long-standing executive and my mentor. Something you teach a lot is this idea that every leader casts a shadow.
Your shadow is how people see you when you're leading. What you say, what you do, what you measure, what you prioritize, what you permit. When I ran a hospital, we had a medical error. The doctor said, it wasn't my fault, it's the nurse's fault. The nurse said, it wasn't my fault, it's the tech's fault. You know what I said? It's my fault. Blaming retrospectively does nothing. Am I holding myself accountable for the shadow I'm creating? Don't start blaming your team. Start looking at yourself in the mirror.
You've got a high performer, but they're not a nice person. How do you proceed?
Long term, that person's going to...
I'm going to get right to it. Something you teach a lot and you're very well versed in is this idea that every leader casts a shadow. And so I'm trying to understand what that means. What does a shadow look like? And I mean, I'm not even aware of this idea. So help me understand what is a shadow that a leader casts, and how do we make it a good shadow?
Mm-hmm. Well, first of all, the key concept is that the strength of your shadow determines the strength of your business. So you got to know what your shadow is, and you got to be intentional about it. And think of your shadow is how people see you all the time when you're leading. So there's a variety of different pieces that fit into your shadow. What you say, okay? So for example, I tell the people that work for me that I make mistakes. Why do you think I say that?
Maybe to make them feel like if they make mistakes, it's a normal thing and that you own them.
Exactly right. Also, because it's true. I do make mistakes. I tell people I make 4 to 5 mistakes a day. You know, hopefully I make 4 to 5 correct decisions a day, but the reason I let my team know that I make mistakes is so that they feel comfortable letting me know, wait a minute, David, I think you may not be making the right decision. I would rather want to know now than 6 months down the road after we built the product and it doesn't work and they say, I knew it all the time, David. It never was going to work. So I let people know I'm going to make mistakes. Let's fall forward. And that creates a team, a shadow of everybody who says we can take some risks. We can work together as a team because someone else on that team is going to catch me if I'm inaccurate. I tell people that when I hire people who are smarter and who work harder than me. Why? Because if I'm the smartest person in the room, we got problems. My skills are to bring people together to get the decision across the line, to create the strategy, to make sure that people are doing what they're supposed to be doing. But I want really smart people, smarter than me, around the room. So one of the pieces of my shadow is what I say. Another one is, what do I do?
So hang on. I want to go back to what you say really quick. When you say what I say, are you referring to what you say in presentations? Are you saying what I say every moment they see me?
It is all the time as a leader. What you say is critical. If you say, we are a values-based organization, but then values don't come up during your meetings, people don't know how to live your values, people don't understand how you are rated on the values, then what you say really doesn't mean much.
So you got value. You're like, we're an organization and these are our values, but you don't talk about them.
You don't use them.
You don't use them.
You don't leverage them. You don't, at the end of the year, evaluate people on those values. But you say, oh, values are important. But nobody then knows why they're important.
So what does it do to a team of people when you've got values written on things, but then you don't talk about them?
People think that your shadow is small because it isn't really important. It's just something that is supposed to be there for the company. When I ran a hospital, I took the values off the wall and put them on the floor. Let's walk on them. Let's use them. Let's determine whether or not we're actually living those values. The value statements you come to in most businesses could fit almost any business. I've seen integrity as a value everywhere. But what does it mean for your business? When you say it, what does it mean? How are you using it? How are you leveraging it to get results? So, what you say is critical. Even more critical is what you do.
Mm.
Because just because you say something doesn't mean you're going to follow through. So, if you say, for example, that culture is important, but then you are not intentional about the culture you're creating in the organization, that you don't live the values that we were just talking about because you're you're short with people, you're not listening. If you say you make mistakes, and then when someone says, David, I think you made a mistake, and you say, you're just an idiot. I'm the CEO. I'm right. You know what? What you do is important. One of the most incredible things that ever happened to me was um, a leader who said that appreciation was important.
Mm.
I just joined the organization, and 4 months into it, the CEO, so 2 levels above me, sent me a handwritten note thanking me for joining the organization, specifically identifying the work I did in the 4 months, and telling me how critical it was to the mission of the organization. I thought, oh my gosh, that's amazing. He knows who I am. He wrote a letter to me, handwritten. You know what I did? I brought it home. I put it on the refrigerator. All the kids' art was gone, and I put it smack in the front of the refrigerator because I was so proud. So that was a leader whose shadow cast was large because he said, we want to appreciate employees for what they do to our organization. And he showed it by writing me a note. That was more
Just
important
a note.
than a note, just a handwritten note,
note.
but it was specific.
Yeah.
He knew what I had done in the 4 months I had been there. I'd only been there 4 months. I didn't even know he knew my name,
Mm.
but he took the time. And this leader, he was, doing stuff much at a higher level than I was. And he had much more important things to do than write me a handwritten note, but he did it because he said appreciation is critical to our organization. And so he said, I'm going to also do it.
So he took, he says it's important, but then he took action and wrote it down.
You got it.
I have these note cards that I had made that have the company, and I love writing notes to people. I feel like it's such a powerful thing to acknowledge someone with handwriting. You don't see it very often.
I still have that note 15 years later.
Do you really?
I do. Because it is so important to me that, this leader, who I think was just an incredible leader, took the time to recognize just a regular employee at that point in time. And that made a huge impact on me. And it reminded me that he was trying to cast a shadow that was large, that people were important, that when we say, people are our most important resource, he wasn't just saying it, he was taking action on it.
So how did that impact your behavior? Did you start writing notes to people?
You betcha. I figured if he could take the time, and he worked a lot harder and was paid a lot more and was a lot smarter than me, like, I should be doing it.
Mm.
Another example is I had a leader I worked with who said meeting starters are important, where the belief is that a meeting doesn't begin until everybody in the room has had the opportunity to talk. So meeting starter would be like, it's December. It's one of the darkest months of the year. What's bringing you light, Charles? And we go around the room and we answer that question, just 2 to 3 minutes at the beginning of the meeting, because we want to believe that everybody at this meeting needs to be engaged. And again, we talked about this in our organization, but when I saw my leader actually doing it, taking those 2 to 3 minutes of the meeting, beginning of the meeting, I thought, if she's doing it, heck, I need to be able to do it myself. And it changed the way I ran my meetings.
How do you think that impacts the people in the meeting?
Well, I think it's huge when people see a leader saying things and doing things that aligned. It's something that connects with them because that's the type of leader they want to be. And they want to, you don't typically work for an organization, you work for a person. And if that person comes to the table and connects with you on a human being basis, you have a sense of belonging, you're going to stay in that organization.
Mm. That's so powerful when you think about people don't work for companies, they work for people. It's
Yeah.
kind of like what Maha said on our podcast. She said, people don't follow companies, they follow people, right? It's such a powerful thing because every single person in an organization kind of has their own little individual brand within the team.
I mean, I created a company with two of my partners that's called You Belong.
Mm.
The whole concept there is if we can create organizations who believe in belonging, employees are going to be retained longer. People are going to give their discretionary effort and work harder because belonging is just a magic potion that if people believe that they belong to this organization, that they feel comfortable in bringing them their true self, you're going to be more successful in that organization.
It just makes me think about all the interactions I have every day and how I could be better, like more effective in that way. And I love the meeting opener thing because you're right. You attend a meeting, and if you just sit down, you could be somewhere else entirely mentally. But once you have to engage with the rest of the team and you share something that's not necessarily related to the meeting, you feel this sense of community almost.
I was at a meeting, not that I was running, and it was going to be everybody at that meeting had to cut their budget by between 10 and 20%. And we had to figure out collectively who was going to do 10, who was going to do 20. It was a 2.5 hour meeting. Everybody had spreadsheets. Everybody came with their arms crossed and angry that we were going to have to cut our budget. Nobody believed that they could cut their budget. And the leader started with the question. He said, before we begin, we're going to do a meeting opener. And the meeting opener is, what's the best advice you've ever received? We went around the room really quickly, and people talked about their grandfather. People talked about a friend that had given their advice. And all of a sudden, we all became human. And this 2.5 hour meeting got done in an hour because we recognized we were going to all be there. It was going to be tough, but it wasn't about fighting each other. It was trying to come to a collective answer to what we were trying to achieve. And it was so much easier when we saw humanity in each other's eyes. So I always think that one of the key pieces, most leaders that I've seen start a meeting and they say this, okay, we're going to go over the agenda. The agenda starts with approving the minutes, and then we're going to, you handed the agenda out, don't lower the energy in the room, build the energy up, and you're going to be able to leverage that energy to get better results in the meeting.
What I'm taking away right now is just how deliberate you are with each thing, right? Because obviously if you show up and you just go over the agenda you already sent out, it's almost like you weren't prepared.
Correct.
Right? You're like, well, I guess I should burn up 8 minutes talking through what we're going to talk about and have a meeting about the meeting. And I hate those kinds of meetings.
And it happens all the time. Why? Because that's the way other people have done it. When, I used to do my one-on-ones with my team, they used to be an hour. Everyone was set for an hour. Why? Well, because one-on-ones last an hour. And everyone's like, oh, God, I got to spend an hour with David? And then I changed it up. I said, let's do 30-minute one-on-ones. Let's be intentional about creating energy and focus. Because my thinking was, if I do 30-minute meetings, we're going to really be focused. Now, there were two conditions to those meetings. One was the person I was meeting with had to send the agenda to me, their agenda, within 24 hours before the meeting. I had to send back any feedback I had about that agenda, 2 to 3 hours before the meeting so that he or she could be prepared. So the thinking was, oh, we already have the agenda. And the purpose of the meeting was, how can I make that person even more effective than they are? Because that's what a meeting's supposed to be about. It's not supposed to be updates. Send me an email if you want to give me an update. But it's really about what rocks are in your way that I can help push away. And so those meetings that started out to be an hour were a focused 30 minutes, and they were so much more effective.
When you wake up on the wrong side of the bed, because we all do, right?
You
We
betcha.
sometimes you have a bad night's sleep and you just wake up and you don't have the energy you normally do, but you still have to go have one-on-ones or have, important meetings. What are some things that you do that help you get into the right headspace so that you're not bringing negative energy to your team?
So a real good question is how, your energy determines other people's energy. And if there's something, if you go into a meeting and everyone's like, oh, this is going to be a boring meeting and, no one's going to like it, you have the power to change that. And so leverage that. Because remember, the difference between time and energy, everyone says, oh, this meeting's got to be for an hour, or there's 24 hours in a day. I got so much work to do. Energy is limitless. You control, not time. You can't, even you, Charles, can't put 25 hours in a day, okay? But what you can do is lift your energy up and build up other people's energy. So the way you do that is you change things around. If I wake up on the other side of the bed or I have a crink in my neck, I start my day the same way. I work out every morning because that's going to build my energy, okay? That then allows me to bring that workout energy into my work. We're going back to the shadow. We're going to get back to that. But when do you think your shadow is the strongest, the brightest? What time of the day?
I mean, for me, it's the morning, right? I like you, I like working out in the morning because everything's warmed up and I, come into a 9 a.m. meeting already spooled up.
And so if you go outside, your shadow is the longest, the brightest at the start of the day and the end of the day.
Yeah.
Because that's where the sun is not on top of you. The sun's on top of you, you have very little shadow. So the key part of your leadership shadow is the beginning of the day. You've got to come in and you've got to be intentional to say, my energy is going to impact everyone in my organization, and my shadow can create better business results. So I better have the energy at the beginning of the day. So when you get there in the morning, why not go around and connect with people? Show them that hey, Jim, I heard that you did this great job yesterday. Thank you very much. Or, Sarah, I heard that you're having a couple of issues. What can I do to help you? Because your shadow is bright there. And at the end of the day, thanking, appreciation, showing them that, you know what, you're with them. This is part of the team. So remember that. We haven't even got to fully what your shadow is, but it's brightest at the beginning of the day and the end of the day. Use that, leverage that to drive your organization's performance.
Yeah, I love getting in early. I love getting in early. I get in about 7:30, and I love being the last one out the door because first of all, you can send people off with a smile, right? And if people are encountering challenges throughout the day, the end of the day is where they're like kind of trying to bring them to a head or, close them out. And I love to walk around. I mean, 4:30, 5 o'clock, I love doing a lap around and just seeing how people are doing.
That's great. When I ran a hospital, we used to have pancakes. I used to make pancakes in the morning for people because I love that kind of connection. We had peach Snapple day, and we used to hand out peach Snapple. Why? Because peach Snapple is the drink of gods. And under every cover for peach Snapple, it has a really interesting fact. So again, do things that bring energy to your organization, not because it's like someone told you, but that you want your shadow to be cast brightly at the beginning of the day. You want to say things and do things. Because the third part of your shadow is, what are you going to prioritize? Okay. What's important to you? What do people see you doing? If you say appreciation is the glue that connects their organization, do you show appreciation? Do you write notes? If you're doing your meetings, I had a boss who said, everybody's got to have a one-on-one with me once a week. And then you'd get there, they'd prioritize the one-on-one, but then they'd be doing their emails while you're there, or someone would come in and all of a sudden, you weren't important. So what they said, yes, meetings. What they did, they actually scheduled them. But when they prioritized that time, it wasn't about you. So part of your shadow is what you prioritize, okay? And then what you measure. Okay. So if you believe values are important, that culture is important, then it isn't just the what, okay, the results you got, but it's also the how. So are you asking your team to evaluate their employees based upon the how? Are people living our values? If you think that mentoring is important, are people mentoring each other? And if you have a sales team, sure, the bottom line is you got to get those sales in, but how are they doing it? Are they bringing others along with them to show them what's critical? It is so again, your shadow is what you say, what you do, what you prioritize, and then how you measure it at the end of the year.
How do you measure stuff like that? I mean, it's easy to measure sales metrics. It's easy to measure certain things, but some of those other things, it's how do you measure them?
It's a real good question. And unless you're intentional about it, it doesn't work. But there are organizations that are intentional about their values all the time because they take the value of integrity and they say, okay, what does it mean in practice? How is it going to work? And then they take behavioral expectations for integrity and they say, okay, has that person acted with integrity? If it's about, if you have a value of respect, okay, are you respecting your colleagues and do they respect you? And so sometimes you got to do an evaluation about that. So what does it mean? It could mean something as simple as creating behavioral expectations for each value and then talking about them, living them, um, and then evaluating people at the end of the year based upon that. But each organization, the fun or the intentionality of it is taking those values and creating those behavioral expectations underneath them so that they're unique to your organization and the work that you do. And let me just tell you one last thing, which is what makes up a shadow. So, what you say, what you do, what you measure, what you prioritize, and then lastly, what you permit. This is one that often people forget because if you say all these things are important, but you permit that bad actor in your business because they're getting short term results, people are going to, it doesn't make a difference about how we live our values. It's really about the results we get, which performance could be a value in your organization. That's critical. All of this is connected to performance. But, I worked in an organization where we had an actor who got great short term results, but did it in a way that destroyed everybody else in their path. They were all about themselves getting the bottom line, sales. And anybody stood in their path, that language they used, the way they treated people internally, if they needed support in the sales function, they would yell and scream. But man, at the end of the year, they did pretty well. Year after year, that person was staying in the organization and getting bonuses until we started thinking about, wait, we're permitting this bad behavior when we're saying we're doing the right things. What kind of a shadow is that casting? And finally, because we recognize that disparity, that person was let go.
Mm. How, okay, so this brings up a really important topic that I want to get into just briefly. You've got a high performer, but they're not a nice person and they create a lot of collateral damage. But let's say they're in sales and they're creating the result that they were hired to create. How do you proceed?
You let him go because it's not just the what, it's the how. If that's what you believe, if that's part of your organization culture, because long term, that person's going to do more damage than the short term success. When you say they're doing damage, and I've seen people like this in organization, the morale of the rest of the organization takes a huge dip because that person is not only getting results, they're getting accolades for it
Yeah,
and
bonuses.
bonuses. And you were like, well, I guess that's the way I have to act. I have to trample other people. I have to be bitchy and mean and angry and demanding. Long term, your culture is going to fail as a result of that. And you're going to have employees leave and the cost of rehiring people, you're going to have people say, well, you know what? This is just a job. This is not a passion. That leader that I'm working for, shadow is not one that I want to believe in. They're saying things that are important, but you know what? They're permitting bad behavior.
When you have this epiphany, let's say you're listening to this right now and you're like thinking of a person on your team or in your company, how do you go about, before you just fire them? Yeah, obviously, if they're impactful like that, you give them, you talk to them.
Yeah.
How do you communicate like, hey, your performance is great, but the attitude ain't working?
Bingo. You just did it. I mean, one of the things that we are afraid of as leaders is to say what we really believe.
Mm.
And you go to a leader and say, you know, you've really gotten amazing results this past year, but you've destroyed everybody in your path, and that's harming the rest of the organization. I really want you to stay and continue to perform like you're doing, but not the way you're doing it. Is that something that you can change? Do you even understand what you are doing to get the results that you're doing?
How often do you see people explained that and they're like, oh my gosh, I didn't know that people felt that way about me? Or do they usually know?
I think they usually know. What they don't recognize is that you know, and that you're going to hold them accountable for the behavior that is critical to a long-term success of your organization. Why? Because they've been very successful their entire life doing what they're doing.
How often do they actually change?
You know, I'm going to give people the benefit of the doubt, but only for a short period of time. I think it's hard to change your behavior when you have been rewarded for bad behavior. You know, just think about the little kids. You know, like if they throw a fit and you give them candy, they know they can get candy by throwing a fit, so they start throwing a fit. I mean, we've all had little kids do that, and you got to change the dynamic, the behavioral expectations as a result of that. But in the long term, the health of your organization is more critical than that short-term success. And you'll find that the next person who steps into that person's shoes will be more effective, and the whole team will breathe a sigh of, I mean, I've had it. And I know we had a medical director in an organization that I worked with who would just trample people, who would yell at people, who would say, you know, you're not listening to me. And finally, I had to say, this ain't working. Even though you are bright and you are capable and you got a great vision, nobody wants to work with you. And so we got to mix things up. And they were no longer part of the organization.
So they didn't want to put in the change, or they weren't capable of putting in the work to change.
They didn't believe it was necessary because they had been successful. I mean, most of the people that we work with have been successful based upon the behaviors they learned. And it's hard to unlearn them, but not impossible.
Yeah, maybe they need to just go find a culture that tolerates that and is a culture of, that toxic stuff.
Yeah. And you know what? There are organizations that have toxic employees in there. And guess what happens? Everyone tries to run from those organizations to come to an organization that doesn't have it, that wants people and it wants to create a healthy, high-performing culture. And that's the key. If, the research shows overwhelmingly that if you create a healthy, high-performing culture, you're going to outperform those that don't have it. And there are elements to that culture. One of the key ones is, let's go back to your leadership shadow. That's the thing that's so amazing that people don't realize is you get to, as a leader, control the culture of the organization. You set the standards because people are all going to listen to what you say, what you do, what you prioritize, etc. And so then the question comes, if leadership shadow is so important, how do I build my leadership shadow? Like, what do I do to be intentional about it rather than just know what's included in it? What do I do? And the first thing you got to do is be passionate about what you do. Because the fascinating thing is people follow people who are passionate about their job. Why? Because they bring energy, they bring excitement, they bring the why. You know what? A lot of people work simply for a paycheck, which isn't critical, which is important. There's nothing wrong with that. And yet, those people who can connect their paycheck to a higher why are going to give you their discretionary effort, are going to be more energized, are going to be more excited, and are going to be committed to the organization. And who do you think they follow about that passion? It's the leader. And you know what? You got to be passionate about what you do if you're a leader. It could be because you're putting on amazing events. It could be because you're saving people's lives. It could be because you're building buildings. It could be because you run an institution that's providing technology that is helping people in their everyday lives. My why doesn't have to be your why or somebody else's why, but the leader has to show their mission drive, their purpose. And that's the number one. Are you bringing that passion?
Wow. Okay, what do you say to people who have a passion for something, but they don't have any talent in that passion?
You're the wrong leader for that organization. You're not you're not aligned with the business.
Yeah.
So, no, I mean, you know what? You got to find your passion. I work with a lot of leaders who went into a business or a profession because, you know, they thought that was the sensible thing to do, whether it was financial results or their parents always wanted them to be an accountant or, you know, they took over the family business, but they're not passionate about it. And I say to them, you know what? You're in the wrong business. You're not leading the right business. If you don't show it, if you don't believe it, you're not going to be successful. And you know what? I get why people stay in jobs that they're not passionate about because it's a paycheck. But what I say to people is, you know what? If you follow your passion, you'll never go hungry. You may not always be full. You may not be as wealthy as you would be if you continued in the family business, but you're not going to ever experience the connection to what you're doing. You know what? We work 100,000 hours in our lifetime, approximately 100,000 hours. And you get to go to that place and you're not going to be passionate about what you're doing. You're not going to be excited about what you're accomplishing. No, go change. You're going to be better, happier if you do.
Oh, and there's a position somewhere out there for that leader to be passionate. Somewhere. They just have to look.
And it's never too late to find that passion. It's never too late. I know a bunch of people that I work with who are, you know, in professions, and they have been doing these jobs because it just made sense. They went to law school and, you know, they became a lawyer and now they're just doing litigation the whole time. And they're like, it's not something I enjoy doing. Well, you're never too old. Change it up. And they're worried about, well, I don't know if I can start something new. And what about financial considerations? I get all that. All important things that you've got to list out. But what's even more important is the passion that you're bringing to the work, because it's 100,000 hours of your life. You might as well do something.
Well, when you're talking about this, I'm thinking about leaders of leaders, you know, like a CEO who has a management team, who has managers underneath. And when you notice a leader on your team isn't passionate, do you think that that's something that can be fixed? Or is it like, you know, we should probably part ways with that person? They're not passionate. I need to do them the service of helping them move on.
I think, first and foremost, the leader of the organization has to be passionate. If you bring that passion and someone who works for you doesn't connect with that, doesn't connect with your why, then they may not be the right fit. And sometimes it's tough for people to see that themselves. And they're like, well, I hear all the time, it's just a job. Like I go there 9 to 5 and I do my thing, but it doesn't need to bring me passion because I have other things outside of work. I get that. I think that's rational. It's not someone that I want to work for me. When I worked for hospitals, I wanted people who believed this was an amazing job because they got to help people when they're the most vulnerable. When I had a bad day running hospital, what did I do? I went to the visitor room and talked to people whose loved ones were in the hospital. And I thought, my God, my bad day is minuscule to what they're doing. And even though I don't have any medical background or clinical background, I get to help people who are vulnerable. And that if I can't communicate that to the people that I'm working with, that's a problem that I have.
I'm thinking about when you're a customer and you encounter someone that's working in a job and they're so passionate about what they're doing. It is refreshing and energizing, no matter if it's a, wait staff at a
You
restaurant
betcha.
or a store clerk or a vendor you're working with. When you see that that person is passionate, being the customer, it's it's so powerful. It makes you want to work with them or buy from them or spend more money, or because you're like, oh my gosh, the passion is still alive. Like,
You got it.
this person isn't just, dead inside.
Go buy a car from a salesperson who's passionate. Go to a hotel where the person who welcomes you to the hotel is passionate. I go to work out, and the health club, the person who, when they check me in, say, "Hi, David, hope you have a great workout." I'm like, she likes her job. And already I have been lifted on what I call the mood elevator, and I'm feeling better already. Those are the people I want around me. Now, again, this is not just like, oh, fake passion. This is about, are you connecting with what you're doing 100,000 hours of your life? If you look at it that way, you say, okay, maybe I don't need as much money, or maybe I don't need the biggest house. What I need is something that I'm just driven to succeed in. The next thing for a leader who can build their leadership shadow is to be fully engaged. Are you a fully engaged leader? And this is a little bit of a tricky one, because the research shows that a fully engaged leader is fully engaged in three parts of their life, not just at work. They're engaged at work, they're engaged at home, and they're engaged in the community. The book, The Power of Full Engagement, has this great research based methodology that those leaders who are most successful are those that are fully engaged in those three parts of our life. And often we think of the leader that works 100 hours a week and who's there morning, noon, and night. Those are the ones who are the most successful. It's not true. Those are ones who burn themselves out and burn out their employees. If you are fully engaged at work, not, some days you're going to have to pull those long hours. You got a client, you got on a flight, you got to do those things. But if you're fully engaged at work, but you're fully engaged at home, you're connected with whatever that home life is for you. It could be, parents, it could be a spouse, it could be children, no value judgment, but that you have a family life that you're connected to. And most importantly, or as important, in your community. Because a fully engaged leader is humble. And what that means isn't that, oh, I think less of myself. Okay. Oh, I'm not as good as I should be. Oh, I don't know. I'm not as smart. That's not humility. Humility is recognizing that you are not the center of the universe. And the reason your business is going to be successful is because we have a strong and thriving community. So I'm not judging where you should be involved in the community, but as a business leader, I believe you owe a responsibility to the community in which your business is in to help it thrive. Because otherwise, you're not going to get the employees. You're not going to get people buying your product. You're not going to be able to have safe and secure community because you're not involved and engaged in it. So your responsibility is to get involved in your community in whatever community you define it. It could be religious, it could be civic, it could be the arts, doesn't make a difference. But by being involved in all three parts of your life, by being engaged in them, your business will be more successful, your shadow will be larger, and your leadership will be stronger.
Okay, so when you're talking about passion, right? And obviously being passionate at home, work, and community are really important. How do you think that impacts trust? The trust people have in you when you have passion or you don't?
I think it depends how you show that passion. If you show that passion kind of in a fake way, in a cotton candy way, where like, oh, everything's great and yoo-hoo, and even when things are bad, you're like, we're still going to survive. The trust isn't there. But if people see that you are really connected, that you're there at the end of the day, when I was a prosecutor, okay, we had to get pleadings to the court. At the end of the day, I was the secretary or the assistant. I was the prosecutor, and I was the person who brought it there because it didn't make a difference what your title was. We all had to get the work done. This is the days where we actually had a mimeograph, our pleadings. And when you made a mistake on one, you had to use whiteout for the other two. That's how old I am. But the key was we're a team. And sure, there are different responsibilities in an organization, but do people all understand their role in the overall success? When President Kennedy went to NASA, one of my favorite things, and he said to the person that he met sweeping the floors, "What do you do?" You know what that person said, that janitor said? "I help put people on the moon." Like, look at that connection. Look at that passion. Look at that excitement that person who had a critical job at NASA, but they believed what they were doing were connected to the overall mission. So if you can get and create that passion with people, and it's real, and you know what? Sometimes passion is negative passion. It's stress. We got a client who's in trouble. We provided or we committed to, get them X on this date, and we're gonna have to work harder. There's a leader I know in town who has this amazing client, sent something to the client, and they were like, "This is not up to your standard, and we need you to redo it in 3 days." And he spent those 3 days, 24/7, getting that product up to speed. And everybody knew in the organization that this was critical. But he was passionate about it, not in a cotton candy way, but in this is who we serve. And people recognize that that's what passion means. It's not always positive, but it's providing energy to get the job done.
Okay, so there's 4 elements:
Mhm.
passion. The next one is engagement.
Engagement.
Tell me about that.
So that's where you engage in all parts of your life. So home, work, and community. The next one is actually the third one is really about accountability, which is really, are you holding yourself accountable and are you holding others accountable? So we start with, are you passionate to build your shadow? Second one was engagement. Are you fully engaged? And the third is about accountability. Now, accountability, we often think of incorrectly. We think of retrospective accountability, which is something got screwed up. Who's to blame? I was in an organization and the leader used to say, "Whose throat can I choke for the failure?" Well, what does that look like? Like, really? But that's the language. And it was said with some humor. But even when we were looking at a goal, okay, if it doesn't work, whose throat can I choke? Okay, that's about blame. I love the comment that when you point your finger at somebody and say, "You're to blame," there's 3 fingers pointing back at you. And I think about that all the time when I try to think about someone's responsible. When we had a medical error at a hospital that I was working at, and you know what I did? The doctor said, "It wasn't my fault. It's the nurse's fault." The nurse said, "It wasn't my fault. It's the tech's fault." The tech's fault said, I don't know. You know what I said as the hospital president? "It's my fault." Because it probably was. We didn't have a system set up correctly to prevent that medical error. So blaming retrospectively does nothing. Accountability is about prospective action. What more can I do to get better results? What more can we do to get better results? So when I talk about accountability, the first thing I have to do is, am I holding myself accountable for the shadow I'm creating, for the intentional shadow I'm trying to achieve, for the culture I'm building in the organization? Am I saying things and doing things and prioritizing things and measuring the right things? Because don't start blaming your team that that you're not getting the results you want. Start looking at yourself in the mirror. So accountability is critical, first and foremost, to yourself. It's the number one driver for business success in an organization, which is really interesting. Harvard Business Review says, you know, what are key drivers of business success? People say, oh, communication or financial outcomes or trust. Really, it's about accountability. Are you holding yourself accountable for the culture you're trying to create, your shadow, etc.? Once you feel comfortable that you're holding yourself accountable, then it's about, how do I hold my team accountable? And in order to do that, are there clear expectations? Do people know what good outcomes look like? Are we looking at the outcomes on a regular basis and saying, wait a minute, what are the barriers in our way? Are we going to achieve those successes? And then you can start holding your team accountable, and you can help them get the results they need. That's the key. And then all of a sudden they realize, wait a minute, I'm being held accountable. Am I holding my team accountable? And it's not doing their job. If you have to hold them accountable by doing their job, you got someone in the wrong spot. It's about making sure that they have the resources to effectively accomplish the goal.
So it makes me wonder about, you have a leader who's always, taking the blame for something that happened on their team. That's great, but it happens over and over again, and they never help their team take accountability. How can I help others take accountability and know that it's not, doesn't mean they're a bad person, doesn't mean they're going to get fired, right? Because I think fear is a big driver of running away from accountability, right? How do I empower others to feel like they can take responsibility when they need to?
Well, first I'll start with the story because it's one of my favorite accountability stories, and it happened to me. So I told you I was a prosecutor for the U.S. Attorney's Office in D.C., and I worked for an amazing Attorney General at that time, Janet Reno. And I was fairly new, and I was given a big case, and I filed a motion, and the motion was denied. It was denied because I screwed up. I made a mistake. And the Attorney General of the United States wanted to meet with me. And I was like, oh my God, I'm in trouble. I'm going to be fired. So
You must have been sweating
oh
bullets.
my gosh, sweating bullets. And I went with my boss. And we went to Janet Reno's office, which is a whole different story, but really cool. She was actually housed in the assistant or the secretary's part of the office because the real big office, she said, was too big for her. So she had her office right when you walked in, because that's where the secretary would have been in, and the other big office is where the secretary was. It was just really fascinating about how she saw herself as a servant leader. But I walk in, and she says hi to my boss. We had not met. I didn't know, do you shake the Attorney General's hands? Do you call her, Madam Attorney General? What do you do? I had practiced
So
all
you're like
that.
nervous.
Oh my God, sweating bullets. Because I'm a young, new prosecutor. And she says to the two of us, myself and my boss is there with me. And we didn't, we talked a little bit about what went wrong, but we didn't rehearse what we were going to say. And she said, my first question is what happened? What went wrong? And I'm about to say, I blew it. I screwed up. And as I'm about to do it, I hear my boss saying, it was my fault. I made a mistake. And I looked at him. I'm like, what's going on? Am I like dreaming this? And he says, I'm David's supervisor. I didn't have time to review his motion. I should have, but things got busy, and I'll do better the next time. And Janet Reno looked at me and looked at him and said, terrific. Thank you very much. I appreciate that accountability. And we walked out. And I said, what did you do? He goes, it's true. It was my accountability. I said, but I was the one who screwed up. He goes, yeah, but I'm your boss. You know what I would have done for that boss? I would have walked over fire for him because he said he was accountable for my error. And so what do you think I did? When I went back to the office, I made sure I double checked and triple checked. I made sure I asked other people, what do you think? Am I doing this correctly? Is there anything I'm missing? And then I would start holding, as a leader, other people accountable. So again, the short answer to your really important question is, if you demonstrate leadership accountability in a positive, prospective way, the people on your team will understand that, feel loyal to you, feel connected, and they will model that on an ongoing basis. And if they don't, then you got the wrong person. Sometimes people will always say, the dog ate my homework. The dog ate my homework. those are not people you want in your organization, because guess what? It ain't the dog's fault you left your homework, on the ground, on the couch, when you had written the paper. You're 16 years old. You can put it in a folder and put it in your backpack before you go to bed. First time you can say, oh gosh, what was the lessons you learned? After that, if it keeps on happening again, then you may not have the right person.
I'm sure the amount of respect you had for that leader just went through the roof when you walked out of that office. I mean, you must have been like, oh my gosh, like I want to be like that.
Not only do I want to be like that, but the vision of that leader still lives in my mind. Like when you work for an amazing leader, not only do you appreciate that person, but you want to be like that person. And if we as leaders talk about our legacy, isn't that what we want? Don't we want people who look at us and say, wow, there are attributes of that person that I aspire to be like? I still follow that leader's career path, and he has been extremely successful. And I think to myself, wow, look what he's taught me. And not only what he taught me, I'm hopeful that I try to model the things that he taught me to the people that I lead, and on and on and on. And to me, like, that's leadership legacy. That's a shadow that if I cast correctly could help our community, can help. You know what? We have so many problems in our society. Leaders are a key uh, piece of the puzzle. And if they can cast a positive shadow, we can solve some of these problems together.
I think about when you have these models of leaders in your mind, right? Like this person you're talking about. And it makes me want to ask you about how important is it to have mentors that you can learn from, and how important is it to be surrounded by other leaders you can look up to?
Yeah, really good question. I think mentors are critical. A responsibility for a leader is to mentor others, sometimes formally, sometimes informally. Another huge opportunity are peer groups. I never had a peer group when I was, 30 to 64. Um, and I didn't really even know what they were. I've just started leading two peer groups for SOAR. And the amazing thing about it was I, I am so impressed at how powerful they are. You get 12 leaders in a room, and most leaders have the same issues. It's about confidence, it's about performance, it's about growth, it's about strategy, it's about, when do I take action? And you get 12 leaders together and they're sharing their concerns. The results of that are incredible. They not only become friends, they learn from each other. And I only wish that I would have had that for the past 30 years. But watching these leaders connect in a way that's so powerful and learn from each other is another thing about, having a group of people that you can connect with and share and be honest and bring your whole self to, that isn't necessarily the people you work with on a day-to-day basis, is really helpful to the performance of your leadership shadow.
Yeah, I love that. I've been a part of a peer group for going on 12 years, and being a part of SOAR has been huge for me. You obviously being a major mentor as my leader in that group has been a game changer. I always joke that gold bars just fall out of your mouth, even on accident. But I agree, being surrounded by people who give different perspectives on the same issues, it's just so powerful. Okay, so the fourth one you mentioned.
Yeah, there's one more, and it comes down to integrity. All of these words that I've said are important, but if you don't live them, if you don't act them, integrity is doing what you say and saying what you do. It's really simple. You know, um, if you say you're going to have an intentional leadership shadow and you're going to work on it, then you got to go work on it. You know, there's this old story about somebody who wanted to learn to play guitar. And every 6 months they'd say, I want to learn to play guitar. I really want to learn to play guitar. But they never bought a guitar. They never found a teacher. They never understood what it meant. It's like, it's just words. Like, stop saying it. Shut up. I tell people all the time, just like, shut up. You know, either do it or don't do it. And being intentional about all of this, understanding that if you have a strong shadow, your business is going to be stronger. It's not just about who you are, it's about what you do. So integrity is taking all this and practicing it, working on it. I'm a big journaler, a believer in journaling. Like, write down what you think your shadow is today and what you want it to be tomorrow, and how you're going to get from here to there. You know, when the best time to plant an apple tree is?
Yeah, 10 years ago.
10 years ago, you betcha. And the second best time?
Right now.
Right now. So get that journal out. Figure out what is your shadow today. And if you need to, ask people. And it doesn't need to be a survey of an organization, but sit down with your direct reports one-on-one and you say, you know what? How do I show up for you? What's working? How can I be even more effective in supporting you to be successful? And if they say, oh, just keep on doing what you're doing, you didn't ask the question enough times. No, really. How can I be even more effective? And they may say, well, okay, just communicate with me more. No. I get all that. You got to ask a question 3 or 4 times. How can I be even more effective? How can I show up better? And you're going to start finally believing people's words, because they're going to think that you're really listening to them, and they're going to say what you think. It doesn't mean you have to do everything. All of this is not like, oh, once someone tells me that this is what they want, oh, I want you to double my salary. You can say no. Or I want you to, be in the office more. You can say no. But if they say things that can help them be even more successful, take it in. How am I showing up? Take it in. Once you start getting a sense of how you're leading, both at work, at home, and then leveraging this in the community. Last thing that I think is really important about the community, organizations who are big organizations that are IT organizations or health organizations, or there are businesses that have a huge skills in certain specific ways. And they say, okay, let's go do a community project and we're going to serve the homeless by making sandwiches. I think, great. I really do think that's okay. But how about leveraging your skills, your expertise in technology for a nonprofit organization in your community? How about creating a relationship with that organization that helps them get stronger as you get stronger? So building up those relationships, that is going to show that you actually have integrity, that you are building the building blocks that are going to strengthen your shadow, your business, and the community that we're in, that we are so thankful for, because they allow us to have a thriving business.
Yeah, that's so interesting that you say the community part of it, because it's, I think the family, the faith, and the business ones are so obvious, but I always think, oh, well, I guess I could go work in a soup kitchen for, a few hours a week. But you had a really good point, and that's that my gifts are better served helping them develop systems, or running the business better, or raising more money in sales, or using my specific talent to help the community, not just, scooping soup, I guess.
Right. And, there's nothing wrong with scooping soup, because it shows that it matters, but it's not that effective for you or for them. And what they really need is a partner. So be partners. I mean, I wrote this down. Great leaders cast shadows that stretch across teams, customers, because customers want to work with great leaders, and communities. And those leaders that have the strongest shadows have the strongest results. So again, start journaling. If you're not getting the results you want at your work, why is that? What are the reasons? And how is your shadow implicating that? Don't always focus in on the results, focus in on your thinking, because the last model is your thinking determines your behaviors. determines your results. Let's go back to that meeting. If your thinking is, this is going to be a crappy meeting, and so your behaviors are, oh God, I can't wait till it's done, and I'm going to start with the agenda, and I'm going to be doing my emails while the leader's there. Your behaviors are, guess what happens? The results are, it's a crappy meeting. If your thinking is, this is going to be a dynamic 30-minute meeting where we're going to get things done, then your behaviors are there. Okay, let's go. And then the results of the meeting are that. Same thing with your shadow. If your thinking is your shadow isn't important, the shadow you cast, it just is what it is. No, if you think that the shadow you cast can be intentional, then your behaviors will be, how can I build my shadow? How can I focus on the things that we talked about today? And guess what happens when you do that? You get better results. And that's the key for any leader, is to get the results that you intend to get.
I think it's so fun when you say those things because we've heard the old adage, whether you think you can or you think you can't, you're right. But the behavior part is so big too, right? You have a meeting and you go into the meeting with a bad attitude. What do you get? A bad result. Well, you chose that, right? You go into the meeting with a good attitude, you get a good result.
Yeah.
It's like whatever you choose is what you're going to get.
You know, I use this as a parent also. If your child says, I want to play college soccer, but they're not getting good grades, and you say to them, hey, if you don't get good grades, I'm not going to give you an allowance, or I'm not going to give you homework. What does that do? Very little, because you're focusing in on the results. If you focus in on their thinking and change their thinking, and you say, well, wait a minute, you know what? If you want to play college soccer, typically someone else has to tell them that because they don't listen to their own parent. You got to get better grades. What they're going to do is they change their thinking, and then they're going to change their behavior. What change their behavior? They'll study. And typically, when someone studies, they get better grades. So their thinking initially was grades don't matter. Their behavior was, I don't study. The results are they got bad grades. If you change their thinking and they said, wait a minute, grades matter because I want to get a college scholarship for soccer, they then say, ooh, my behavior is to study, and then I get better grades. And guess what happens? They get the college scholarship. So these things that I talk about aren't just for your leadership at home. It's also for you as a parent and a spouse, and as a family member, and as a community member. If you say the community is critical, if you're humble enough to believe that the community is critical to your business success, okay, then what do you have to do? Your behavior has to show it. If you say, oh no, I'm so smart, the reason my business is a success is because I work harder than everybody else, or I'm smarter than everybody else. The community doesn't matter, you're not. And then what happens? You're all of a sudden, your business is in a community that is not thriving. If your thinking is the community is part of my business success, then your behavior has to show it. And guess what happens? If your behavior shows it and you connect with a community organization that's doing great things, the results are good for you and for that community organization.
So as a leader, what are the things we must do to be good leaders?
One of the things that I always want in a leader is to be able to make those decisions and not delay. And I would rather have my leader make mistakes, but allow us to continue to move forward than make decisions and it takes a month, because then we just lose energy. And I think a good leader has to recognize that they're not going to get it all right. And if they tell their team that they're not going to get it all right, but they're going to make a decision and allow their team to say, wait a minute, maybe you didn't make the right decision. Let's course correct and fall forward and move forward.
Mm.
And so I would rather make a decision, even if it's not 100% accurate, have the team know that they can influence the results of that, and let's get moving, than the malaise of just, oh my God, over and over and over debating the same thing. It drives me nuts.
So part of that is you talk about developing people.
Mm-hmm.
What does that mean, and how much effort should you be thinking about developing people?
I think the best leaders spend 25% of their time on developing leaders. If you're going to be a leader, you've got to understand that the people you work with are critical to your success. So what does that mean? That means you've got to make sure that people are in the right seats. You got to that they understand the culture of the organization, that people are appreciating the values of the organization, that when they fall, there's someone to catch them and teach them how to do better. And so that's about development. It's about making sure you have the right people on the bus, because if you don't, you'll never go anywhere on that bus worth going. And leaders think, well, that's somebody else's responsibility. That's my HR leader's responsibility. Or no, it's yours. It's yours to make sure that the people fit what you're trying to achieve. And you got to make, again, going back to the first one, making the right decisions. Sometimes you hire an employee who doesn't work out, and you know it. If you read the book Blink, I'm a Blink person where I know pretty quickly whether I made the right choice. The hard part is acting on that blink to say, wait a minute, I made a mistake. I think I've got to make that change. Make it. And everyone around you will appreciate that, even if sometimes, once again, you did it wrong. But you do it compassionately and respectfully, and you are clear about why you're doing it. That makes sense. And so that's why I think one-on-ones are important. Having your team understand that you're there for them, being at the front of the bus when you got a problem, not at the back of the bus saying, okay, who's Xeroxing the documents? No, you are. I don't care if that's not your role. We got to get something done. I use that example again of a leader that I met recently who was amazing. The client didn't love the product that they produced, and they said, we'll fix it. They said, well, you got to fix it pretty quickly. You don't got much time. And he at the front of the bus said, okay, I'll do it, and went back and spent weekend doing it and got the client what they needed.
That's such a good lesson, because sometimes you don't want to impose on your team when something maybe wasn't perfect, but to have a team that trusts you enough that when you say, hey, that we got to fix this. We missed the mark, and I take responsibility with you, but let's put our heads down and work to get this done, whether it's, 3 days or whatever they've got.
You got it.
But I think like you were saying, it starts with the ability to have them trusting that you're saying it because you care about them and the outcome, and not just, being a tyrant.
And blaming does nothing. Blaming does nothing. I'll give you another story from my life. I was running a hospital. CMS, or the Joint Commission, the regulating body, came in, and they were going to do a 4-day review of our hospital to make sure that we met, JCAHO standards. And we had a person on our team who was responsible for it. New president of the hospital. I said to her, you got this? And they were like, yep, we're good. We're good. JCAHO comes in, does this review. Friday afternoon comes, they come to us. And I'm thinking, God, this is going to be great. We're going to be shining. And the JCAHO reviewer sits down and says, well, the first thing I have to tell you is we're going to shut down your hospital next week unless you change the sterilization process within the hospital. I'm like, what? They said, you don't have the sterilization process that we require of this type of a hospital, and you have a week to fix it. And I'm like, oh my God. And so I ran to my boss, who was in a different building. And, I said to my boss, JCAHO is wrong. They're looking at the wrong standards, but it's going to take 2 years to review. It wasn't my fault. We have someone who's responsible for Joint Commission. They didn't do their job, but even if they would have done this job, we wouldn't have changed. It's going to cost $5 million to change the sterilization process. We don't have the time. We don't have the money. And he looks at me and he says, maybe I picked the wrong person to be president of this hospital. I'm like, whoa. What would you think that was telling me? Like, stop blaming other people. Go do something. So I went back to the hospital. And it was the first time we pulled an all-nighter since I was in college. I brought my team together and said, okay, what do? We got to keep this hospital open because our patients and our doctors need us. And so we put our heads together and we actually created a solution. Okay. We had to get some additional surgical equipment. We had to use the community sterilization process. There were 2 hospitals nearby that we would then take a van and we would go bring our equipment to their hospital to do it. We would bring it back and forth. It would cost a little bit of money. We had to go talk to the doctors and say, okay, we're not going to have the throughput in our ERs that we had before, but we're also going to appeal it. And then we're going to then change the sterilization process. It would take 6 months. It would take money. Here's what we would need. Monday morning, 8:00, I'm back at my boss's office, in front of his office as he walks in. He says, "Hi, David." And I said, "Hi." He said, "What do you got for me?" I said, "I got 4 pages for you." He says, "Let's go." I went through it and I told him, this is what we're going to do, A, B, C, D. I said, the team is aligned. We're ready to go. You know what he said? Just do it. Okay? It was about taking accountability. Sure, I could have blamed other people, but I went back to my team and said, it's go time. And it worked. It wasn't the easiest. It wasn't the best, but it was one of the best teams I've been on. A high performing team, because we all knew what we had to accomplish. There were no, oh, you're the president or you're the COO or you're the CFO. We all knew we were in this together, and we did it, and we succeeded. And that taught me a lot about leadership. And I use that every day in how I show up. It's not about me. It's not about my ego. It's about, am I passionate about what we're doing for the organization? Are we meeting the goals? Am I helping people thrive? If I can say at the end of the day, I'm doing that, great. And then hopefully my shadow is cast so that people who work for me do that same thing for the people that they work for. On and on and on. We build a leadership culture who appreciates and recognizes that the shadow is critical to business results.
Are you glad that he said that to you? When he said, I don't know if I picked the right guy now that you're talking like this.
Yeah, I don't know, at that point in time, I probably cried. I was like, oh my gosh, disappointment is always a tough thing for me. When people are disappointed in me, I'm like, oh, I don't think I was glad, but it showed a mirror to my face. And like, oh yeah, David, you talk a good game about leadership, but when things go bad, like, how are you showing up? And I realized I wasn't showing up with accountability. I wasn't showing up well. I was showing up with blame. I was showing up with not engagement in the solution, and that the recognition that there'll be tough times. And he taught me in really short words. He didn't say a lot. That's all he said. But I knew what he was saying. And he was someone that had been mentoring me. You know, I started out as a lawyer and ended up as a hospital administrator only because a leader said to me, David, I think, you're passionate about healthcare. Why don't you learn how to run hospitals? And I was like, learn how to run hospitals? Like, I'm a lawyer. I know how to take depositions. I know how to, do trial work. And he said, you know what? I'll mentor you. And he mentored me all this time till finally he said, David, you're ready to run a hospital. And then he said to me, maybe I picked the wrong person. It's like with your father saying, boy, I didn't raise a son that knew what was going on. And it made a huge difference in me. And again, like, key leaders in my life, they've made a huge impact on me and how I show up. I try to be that same way for the people in my life.
So looking back on it, it was kind of a gift that he said that to you.
Didn't sound or feel like a gift at that moment, but it was a gift. I learned a ton.
And think about it. How many years later this is echoing in your mind?
This is 30 years later.
Yeah.
I still remember what he said, how he said it, and how I felt. I also remember that the team that I brought together at that point in time, we were rocking. We also had fun. It was stressful, but we had fun because we were passionate about what we were doing together.
And I'm sure you're proud of the result you turned out.
Very much
Just
so.
took a little heat.
And the amazing thing is we did appeal it and we did win. So that's the other thing. They were interpreting the regulation wrong, but it didn't matter.
At the time.
At the time, it didn't matter if I was going to help the patients that needed our hospital for their care and the doctors who earned a living at our hospital. It didn't matter to them. And you know what? Who took responsibility when they said, how come you didn't know this? I had to say, It was me. I made a mistake. We should have done something better. We should have been aware of this. Even though in the back of my mind, I wanted to say, well, the dog ate my homework, like they're interpreting the regulations wrong. But what does that do? Not a thing. And I thought this whole time when we got it fixed, maybe I'd be let go because I had screwed up. But instead, my boss said to me, great work.
Wow.
Because you know what? Leadership is not always about the good times. It's about how you show up in the bad times. And it's the shadow you cast in both. Because often when we're under the most stress, we revert back to those negative behaviors, the blaming, the pointing fingers, the, oh my gosh, I don't know what to do, the stress. It's in those times that your shadow shows up and it's the most important. It's like the first thing in the morning. That shadow is critical. You got to show up and you say, okay, we're going to do this. And we're going to do this together. And we're going to accomplish it. And so that team, I still am friends with those people. We still have fun today with each other because of that, even though we don't work together any longer.
Fought and battled together.
You got it. You got it.
So I have two things I want to wrap up with. First one is, if everything you've ever said or tweeted or written or spoken about was erased overnight and you could tell the world one thing about leadership, what would it be? If you could leave us with one thing.
Culture drives performance. That's what I would say. The culture, make it intentional, bring it to your organization, because that is going to pay huge dividends for your organization. A high, healthy, performing culture outperforms those that don't have those qualities.
That's so powerful. Okay, last question. What do you want to be remembered for?
Well, tough question, because it really comes down to all three facets of my life. I want to be remembered as a husband, a father, a community leader, and a business leader who had a strong shadow that helped others and enjoyed what they were doing in all facets of their life.
I think that that's true already.
I hope so. I got great kids, wonderful spouse, and I love working with the people I'm doing. And I just got to remember every day to keep that shadow intentional. Think about it, journal about it. And when I've failed, and I fail all the time, like I say, 4 to 5 times a day, pick myself up and say, how can I improve?
David Orbuch, thank you for coming and joining me today. I really appreciate it.
It's been great. Thank you, Charles.
Hey, if you like this episode, make sure you subscribe, share it with somebody you like, and of course, make sure you check out my company, Eide. We produce conferences and events all over the US, and if you know of a conference or an event that's looking for the best company in the business, check out eidecom.com.